It's a way of the Mr. Quickie, oh yeah. In part 2 of this one-part series, we played God, and not in a Mr. Deity kind of way. We imagined being all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, and creating sentient creatures in a world where they could suffer unspeakably. Then we added in the possibility, or rather the likelihood, of these creatures suffering eternal torments in the hereafter, ultimately realizing that none of us would create such creatures in such a setting. And yet, this is, according to Christianity, exactly what the tribal war god of Abraham did. Our friend Doug over on the PineCreek channel has a number of questions he asks Christians which make this same point. If you were considering having a child, and you learned that this child would ultimately end up in hell suffering eternal torments, would you choose to create that baby? I don't think I've ever heard anyone answer that question in the affirmative. Then Doug asks them if refraining from creating that child would be a loving act, not bringing the child into the world when it's known that the child will ultimately suffer endless eternal torments. Yes, it would be a loving act. Did God create me, knowing that if I die a non-Christian, I'll go to hell? Yes. Then he generally lets them dangle there at the end of the rope they've just tied around their necks. While there is no way to get God off the hook for all the evil and suffering in this world, there is a way to get God off the hook for the endlessly wicked idea known as hell. It's called Universalism, the idea that ultimately everyone gets saved. It wouldn't even be a heavy lift for Christian apologists and philosophers. If our salvation is dependent on believing something in particular, then it is incumbent on an all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing God who knows with certainty what will convince each person specifically to provide everyone with that evidence needed to warrant genuine belief. Since God can't say, well, you should have been satisfied with this level of evidence, when he absolutely knows that that level of evidence won't convince you, we must imagine that an all-loving God will make up for the oversight rather than torture a sentient being who was never even given the chance to believe, given their innate epistemic requirements. Right? In attempting to clean up his 1 in a million / lower the epistemic bar mess, William Lane Craig went on the Capturing Christianity channel where he was asked a very important question.
By the same standard, shouldn't we lower our epistemic bar for universalism?
The standard being that Bill Craig lowers his epistemic bar for belief in Christianity because the message is so wonderful and fantastic.
And I think what he's getting at here is that universalism is even more beautiful, more wonderful than the sort of traditional view where it's eternal conscious torment on Christianity. What are your thoughts here?
What could be more wonderful and fantastic than a loving God saving all of his children and sending no one to hell? This was Bill's answer.
I don't know. I mean, I'd have to think about that. What would be the costs associated with universalism of that sort? I mean, would it mean, for example, overriding free will of human beings? Would it mean that God would force himself upon people? In that case, I think
maybe Molinism is true and God created people who he knew would freely enter into relationship eventually.
Yeah, that's a possibility too. One would need to think more about this.
Oh, for fuck's sake, Bill. Even Cameron gets it. The one person on planet Earth who actually looks smarter when he wears a baseball cap backwards. Bill, you're in your 70s. You haven't had time to think about it? #caveman lawyer. All that time you spent getting your master's in theology and a PhD in philosophy, and it never occurred to you to take the time, given how wonderful and fantastic universal salvation would be? Bullshit! There's only one reason people like Bill haven't thought about it and lowered the epistemic bar for universalism. And he actually let that slip in his answer.
What would be the costs associated with universalism of that sort?
You know what the cost would be? The cost. You can't monetize universalism. If everyone gets saved, you don't need Bill Craig, Richard Swinburne, Cameron Bertuzzi, Mike Winger, the Pope, or any other Christian apologist, preacher, or con man. And where's the buck in that? Where's the fear you can instill in the masses to get them to do what you want? To get them to do what you think is expedient based not on the merits, but on the say of a God who supposedly communicated his will to literal ignoramuses thousands of years ago. That's definitely too high a price to pay for someone like Bill. Imagine the losses in book sales, lectures, professorships. These people who spend their lives shoveling shit and corrupting the minds of the gullible would have to go get real jobs where they do something other than pretend to know anything more than anyone else about matters of which no one knows anything. That's a bar way too high for Bill and his ilk. Once again, I'm me. Thanks for watching.